lot of talk about this. Is this a good fit? Kevin Durant had a relationship with Steve Nash from him being a consultant in Golden State. How did this happen? This is another point guard coach who's been hired with no experience, no coaching experience, that is. Bryan, what do you think of this move? Good, bad? I always think it's too early to judge stuff on coaches, but what do you think of this move?
And there's obviously another element to this we're going to get to. But first, I don't know. You know what I mean? Because we've seen this work with other first-year head coaches. Steve Kerr being probably the most notable recent example, although it worked with Tyronn Lue and it did initially work with Mark Jackson, et cetera, et cetera. Like this has been, and it's also not worked in some other cases that we don't have to get to, involving your New York Knicks, et cetera, et cetera.
Or how about one with the Brooklyn Nets, Jason Kidd?
Yeah.
And I'll get to why that was probably not problematic. I actually think that was less to do with Kidd and more to do with somebody else, but that's a whole other story. Go ahead.
We'll get to that too. But I think, yeah. So I woke up to this. Like it was literally, I slept in, or a little bit, my version of sleeping in, which is basically waking up at 9:30, and it pisses me off anytime I wake up after 9 o'clock because I like being up between like 8, 8:30, 7:30, something like that. But sometimes, I just be up late.
Yeah, 9:30 is real late. Go ahead.
Yeah. Nah, but so I woke up, I saw this, and I thought I just thought I was being punked. I was like, this is bullshit. This isn't even Woj's account. Then you see the check mark, and you're like, wait, what? So then you just start going through the rabbit hole of whatever. And I think I might have tweeted out my first thought before fully getting out of bed.
Now, probably usually generally not a good idea.
I don't know if this is going to... Yeah, nah, get out of bed first. like Herm Edwards said, don't press send. Steve Nash... Look, I have reason to believe he can be a great coach given his player credentials, but we know that doesn't always translate. Magic Johnson being a famous example of that. Steve Nash quietly said that he had been quietly getting these kind of offers, like on the low, like he's had inclinations, he's had like sort of feelers here and there. This just feels like a great situation for obvious reasons. I honestly thought Popovich was going to be a realistic thing, and apparently it was in terms of the talking points and the discussions being had. But I think that this is also going to be a very pressurized situation for obvious reasons because look, the Nets think they're going to win, the fans think they're going to win in terms of winning a championship. I don't, but we'll see what ultimately happens because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and they ultimately signed off on this, obviously, otherwise this doesn't happen, but Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, they, to some degree, are going to want to run this organization their way if they're the stars. Like, for me, it's very simple. The reason why they're in Brooklyn is because the Knicks are run how they're run, and the Nets are run how they're run by comparison. They both wanted to play together in a city that made sense, in a cap situation that made sense. Brooklyn, great playoff run that year when nobody saw it coming. Right place, right time, boom. And all that culture shit, it's out the window. It's all about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving now. So we'll see what happens, but Steve Nash is going to enter with a lot of pressure, pandemic or not.
Yeah, I mean, he's got more pressure than another coach. We talked about coming in and Jason Kidd. When he came in, and Jason Kidd had pressure, but it was kind of because they added some veterans in there, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, and thought that he could kind of stable the ship and would be the voice there. Everybody also thought at the time, including me, I'll be the first person to put this out. I believe I said this when reporting for Nets Daily, which was, look, he can be a good sort of mentor leader to Deron Williams. That did not happen. Do I think that is because of Jason Kidd, based on what I know and things from around the organization at the time? Nah, I think that had a lot more to do with D. Will than that did with Jason Kidd. And there's no shade to D. Will. I just don't think he was necessarily happy to be in Brooklyn. It just didn't fit with, I think, where he wanted to work. And that happens. People get places and they're not really happy to work there. You do have to be a professional. But I think it was more of that. I don't really think it was necessarily either person to blame. But I think it was a tough position for Jason Kidd to be in. To that point, Bryan, is kind of the point that you make. These things don't always work out. This doesn't always play the way... They
probably more often don't, to be honest with you.
Right. Look, it's hard to determine who's going to be and who's not going to be a good coach in the NBA. I don't think it's as easy as people say all the time. And I think people get caught up into narratives and stuff. It's kind of like the way I've defended the Tom Thibodeau hire with the New York Knicks. It's like Tom Thibodeau has this ridiculous narrative that a lot of it isn't true, that he runs his players into the ground. He's broken down all these players and all this stuff. And it's like, all right, but people can't name anybody except for Joakim Noah. I'm not even sure that's all true with Joakim Noah.
And people would say Derrick Rose, but I think his situation was more of a freak situation.
It's a freak situation. He tore his ACL.
And the way he plays is kind of like you're expecting to get hurt.
Right.
You know, honestly.
The aggressive, athletic.
I'm actually surprised at how healthy Russell Westbrook's been throughout his career for that.
Despite him tearing his knee up once, right? And so, it is what it is. Anyway, I think it's hard to figure all that stuff out. I like you. Do I know if Steve Nash is going to be a good coach? No idea. Do I understand why they made the hire? Absolutely. Here's what it comes down to, people. You know what it comes down to? When you have teams, not when you're rebuilding, when you're at the point of what Bryan's talking about, where now it's about the expectations are for you to win a championship. This isn't about, as you said, Bryan, about that culture shit. You can't ride on that anymore if you're the Nets. That's gone, out the window. Now it's about you got two stars in there, superstar and stars, two superstars, whatever you want to call it.
One superstar and one star.
You got them in there. Now, you know what it's about? Managing those superstars. And in 2020, 2021, that is the role of an NBA coach at the very high level who has superstars. Some teams can be based on culture, but there's really only a couple teams you could probably really talk about that right now in the NBA. One might be the Warriors. Two is probably the Miami Heat. How many other teams? Three might be the Spurs. I'll still put them up in there. How many teams you say are really riding on culture instead of necessarily stars? And even though the Warriors have stars, it is about a culture that they've set. Because they had a culture before Durant got there, and after Durant got there, they're going to continue that. The Nets had a culture. They brought in stars, and now it became about what these stars want. KD's got a relationship.
By the way, we should also mention
not
a
bad.
bad thing.
Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it is what it is.
When you bring guys of those caliber, Kevin Durant, who enters your organization, is arguably the best player on earth when he's healthy. You kind of have to cater to those dudes when you bring them in and pay them super max dollars.
Yeah,
this is how it works.
The game is the game. It is what it is, right? This is how it has to be played. And how it's going to be played is, if this superstar player says he wants this guy in here because he thinks he's going to be good, and you're Sean Marks, right, or anybody in this front, what you going to do? You're going to get the guy that KD says that he wants. That's what's going to happen. If just like we don't know that this happened with Atkinson, but if KD and Kyrie wanted Atkinson up out of there, he got up out of there. That's how it's going to be. And it's because the Nets are realizing, there's no shame to the Nets. The Nets are realizing that the game is the game. They have to get a coach who they think is going to make their superstars happy. Now, the job for Steve Nash is, I think Steve Nash is going to be fine. Because I don't doubt Steve Nash has a good basketball mind. Yeah. He is probably the point guard that has really, along with D'Antoni, as a coach, pushed us into this era of basketball that we're seeing now. He's a point guard, I think, who really can understand the modern game of basketball. So there are things I think he has gone for him. Will it work? We don't know. But the biggest thing he's going to have to do, to everybody is he is going to have to manage the egos of the superstars along with the rest of the team. And if he's able to do that successfully, he will be fine. Here's the thing. Nash has got a tough job. That's just the reality of it. You said it. Nash has got it. This is not an easy job. He's coming to New York City to a team that has championship aspirations. And the championship aspirations, whether Bryan doesn't think they're going to win or not, it's not crazy. The East is not that locked off.
The East, yeah.
Philly isn't what people thought they were going to be. Milwaukee isn't what people thought they were to be. And there's teams like Miami who look better than people thought they could be, or Boston that looks better than what people thought they could be. However you want to look at it. And Toronto may still be a player. So it's not crazy to think the Nets can't slide up into that conversation. Now, they got to manage talent. They got to manage those egos. They got to decide what they want to do in terms of getting a third star, which we talked about in a previous podcast with Michael Grady, and hopefully we'll talk about with an upcoming guest. But these are things that are going to have to happen. So I'm not going to go too crazy. And talking to some people around the Nets and who cover the Nets, I kind of get the consensus of the same thing from people. A lot of people are saying, hey, look, this caught me off guard. It was out of left field. I didn't see this coming. Everybody I've spoken to is acknowledging that this is about KD, who really wanted Nash here. And as one person told me, we're now in a wait and see moment. We just got to wait and see. They weren't quick to jump the gun. They just said, look, I have to wait and see about this. And I think that's pretty fair.